Here's the update on the COVID-19 cases in the United States. We now have confirmed 3.53 million cases. That's up 70,254 from yesterday. Fortunately, 1.03 million people have recovered. Unfortunately, 138,000 people have died. That's up by 924. Washington is turning up the heat on Nordstream's European creditors. The United States is trying to exert pressure on European creditors of the Nord Stream 2 project, threatening to impose retroactive sanctions on them. German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas yesterday rejected Washington's latest threat of sanctions on the Nord 2 pipeline between Russia and Germany, saying, quote, European energy policy is made in Europe. And there's also a lot going on with China. We're going to have some real insight into these and some other issues. We turn to our first guest. He's a frequent collaborator with all major news outlets. He is also, you hear him regularly on RT, and he's the author of City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. He is Caleb Maupin. Caleb, as always, welcome back to the Critical Hour.
Sure. Glad to be here as always.
So Washington is turning up the heat on Nord Stream's European creditors. We're talking about Pompeo is demanding Shell, Engie, Uniper, Wintershall, and OMV should immediately leave or otherwise have all of their assets in America frozen. Caleb, what in the world are these guys thinking?
Well, there's just a determination not to allow the Germans to import their natural gas from Russia and to try and compel them against their pretty clear wishes and basic economic interests to import their natural gas from the United States. This fits in with the Trump White House. Their policies call for energy dominance, i.e. Making sure that the United States and its energy, oil, and gas corporations maintain a almost monopoly in the world. They don't want competitors, and they're trying to push Russia off the market. And the Germans are not excited about it and not thrilled about it. Neither are a number of other forces in the European Union. And it's kind of blatant maneuvering and attempting to corner and control the markets, kind of the definition of imperialism.
Garland, let me read this other quote from Heiko Maas before you make your statement, your point. He says, by announcing measures that will also sanction European companies, the U.S. government is disregarding the right and sovereignty of Europe to decide where and how we source our energy. European energy policy is made in Europe, not in Washington. We clearly reject extraterritorial sanctions. Garland Nixon.
Well, Caleb, when we hear the leaders of the United States, particularly the economic leaders, talk about free market capitalism, what this appears to be to me, when I look at what's going on with Huawei, Nordstream, Turkstream, et cetera, it's economic terrorism. It's gangster capitalism. It's the opposite of what they even claim to support. The type of economic, it's basically a militaristic, sanction-oriented, gangster, thuggish policies that say, you'll do what we say worldwide, everyone will do what we say, and we will punish our friends and enemies alike, which to me, Caleb, means we don't have any friends. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting because Michael Reagan, the son of former President Ronald Reagan, he wrote an op-ed basically talking about how manipulation of the energy markets to prevent Russia from making money by selling oil and natural gas to Europe was key in bringing down the Soviet Union. That's Michael Reagan himself. He talked about how the Reagan administration worked with Saudi Arabia to drive the oil price down and to prevent the Soviet Union from making a profit at the point in which France and Germany and other European countries were more open to buying natural gas from them during the 1980s. And that this is economic warfare, plain and simple. I don't understand how anyone in their right mind could think it was logical for Germany to import natural gas all the way from the United States when Russia is right there on their border. Gazprom, this gigantic state-controlled megacorporation, is very happy to supply them with natural gas. It just doesn't make sense. But it's in the economic interest of big oil bankers and monopolists in the United States. So our government is trying to twist the arm of the Germans and force them to work against their economic interests and pay a lot more for their natural gas.
I find it interesting, Caleb, that Foreign Minister Maas said the U.S. government is disregarding the right and sovereignty of Europe to decide where and how we source our energy. He's absolutely right. But when you start talking about disregarding sovereignty, that to me is very, very powerful language. And I think, whether we're looking at Venezuela, whether we're looking at Bolivia, whether we're looking at Syria, Iran and Iraq, the United States ignoring sovereignty. No, this is not new. But in this particular landscape, I think that's very, very dangerous language.
Indeed. And the whole history of Europe as the European countries were rising as colonial powers, Germany was kind of late in the game. They didn't establish a nation state until 1851. And, World War I was basically the Germans battling against the other colonial powers, trying to assert that they were just as much of an imperial and Western capitalist power as the French, the Americans, and the British. Then we have World War II. After Germany is stripped of its colonies, we have, the Nazis seizing control in Germany and trying to reassert Germany as an imperial and colonial power. The Germans have often felt like they've been locked out of the club of Western European colonialists. And that resentment caused two huge world wars. So I think this is not a good development at all. And it kind of really shows that even among, Western European countries, there is a disregard for sovereignty and a desire of some corporations and banks to have dominance over others.
Well, Caleb, let me take a swipe at the Germans and the Europeans real quick. Well. You're going to go along with the U.S. when they disregard the sovereignty of Syria, of Libya, of Venezuela. You're going to recognize Pete Buttigieg of South America, Juan Guaido. You're going to recognize this guy as the president of the country. So from one perspective, when it comes to the modern day colonialism, they're all for it when it comes to these smaller countries who they want to work with the U.S. to rob them of their resources. But now the chickens come home to roost, and the United States visits their imperialism and disregard for sovereignty on people who they thought should be, free from this. Now, all of a sudden, they're angry. Am I wrong in saying though I totally disagree with the United States here, with our country in their perspective, am I wrong to look at the Europeans and say, you're a bunch of hypocrites?
Well, no, you're not wrong at all. But what I will say, though, is that there is increasing distance between Germany and especially, Germany, France, and Britain and the United States, and that, Brexit is opening the door to more distance. And, when I was in Iran, what was the only non-Iranian-made car that I saw on the streets of Iran? The only foreign car you can get in Iran is a BMW. And when I was in Venezuela, I saw a lot of German products. They had the German outlets, for their plugs into the wall. And I will say the Germans, because they feel like they're the underdogs of the Western capitalist powers, they very much have a lot more influence in the developing world. And that, Germany, I believe, has signed on with the Belt and Road Initiative and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And this division between the European mainland and Britain and the United States may become exacerbated as the economy gets worse.
And Caleb, to that point, there's a lot going on with China this week. Iran and China have quietly drafted a sweeping economic and security partnership that's going to clear the way for billions of dollars of Chinese investments in energy and other sectors, undercutting the Trump administration's efforts to isolate Iran. And it's going to provide very, very low-cost energy to China from Iran. Once again, it seems as though the sanction initiative of the Trump administration, that countries are now either telling the United States to go pound sand and or finding workarounds for these sanctions.
Indeed. Well, it's a 25-year agreement. They're waiting for the Iranian parliament to ratify it, essentially. But it's going to go through. There's no question it'll go through. I mean, at this point, the United States stabbed Iran in the back and betrayed the Iran nuclear deal, in which Iran made huge concessions, giving up, almost all of its peaceful nuclear energy program. Furthermore, China is facing increasing hostility from the United States. Trump continues to call it, the Chinese virus, the Wuhan virus, and such. And I mean, you attack countries, they get closer to each other. Iran is also getting closer to Venezuela at the moment. There are Iranian supermarkets opening in Venezuela, and that this idea that if you don't trade with the United States, you're just out of the world market. You have nowhere to go. Well, that's not really how things are working. We're facing an increasingly multipolar world. So if you want to isolate countries and lock them out of the world economy, they can just start to trade with each other.
Well, let me ask you this, Caleb. When I think about Iran in the Middle East allying with China, other countries suddenly start popping into my mind. Lebanon, Syria, kind of that Shia, Iraq, kind of that, the group of Shiite allies. Have you heard anything about any of the Iran's allies, starting to move in the direction to look east as opposed to west? And is that just inevitable? To me, I think it would be inevitable. But what are your thoughts on the rest of the Shia, kind of allied group throughout the Middle East moving towards, completely being allied with China?
Well, one of the recent addresses by Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, focused on the need for the Arab peoples to be friendlier to China. Actually, that was one of the things he raised in his remarks. It was actually, a statement, a speech that he gave to his followers, and he highlighted the importance of the Arab peoples getting closer to China. But this has been going on for a long time. And, it's not the Middle East, but, a little further down the map, you'll find Pakistan. And the China-Pakistan economic corridor is vastly expanding. Pakistan is seeing a huge amount of economic growth because of China. So, China's role in the world is increasing. And this idea that we're simply going to, push them off the world market, I think is a bit of an illusion. If anything, we ought to be able to figure out how we can get along with them and trade with them and do so in a mutually beneficial way. It's been pointed out that, yes, the West, we dominate the oil and gas markets, no question about it. The oil and gas markets of the world are centered around Wall Street and London. But China has a very, very valuable resource under their belt, which is they seem to be very, very clearly dominating rare earth metals, which are essential in making computer chips, essential in, electric car batteries. The economy of the future is going to be far more dependent on rare earth metals. So as rare earth metals become more valuable as technology increases, China's role in the world economy is going to expand.
And to that point about rare earth metals, China is also making very good friends with African countries that also have a lot of rare earth metals, while the United States through AFRICOM seems to be really making a lot of people angry. Quickly, Caleb, to your point about China, they are the second largest world economy, 3.2% reported growth in the quarter. And it seems like they're making progress while we are not.
Yeah, and they got the coronavirus before anybody. They had no warning about it, but they were able to mobilize. And if you pay attention to what Chinese state media is saying at this point, they're pointing out that their system of socialism with Chinese characteristics was very effective in mobilizing the public to defeat the COVID-19 virus. And they see the fact that they have moved on from the pandemic, their economy is now starting to expand, as confirmation of the fact that their socialist system is superior to the Western system that seems to be failing all over the United States, as we've got 39 states at this point where the COVID-19 virus is expanding. I've heard reports about it in Arizona and Texas. They've got refrigerated trucks lined up to use as temporary morgues. I mean, we because we're not all on the same page as a country and there's so many different agendas, we're not able to handle this. But it seems like with their state centrally planned economy, with 5-year plans, with the Communist Party in charge, it seems like they've been able to handle this and deal with it much better as a society.
Yeah, I feel that ultimately what we're looking at, Caleb, if you could comment on this, it appears that when we look at a major health crisis, the country that has, let's face it, a more powerful kind of central planning style government is more effective when it comes to that particular issue. I mean, it seems blatantly obvious to me, and it's not related to ideology and it's not related to economic principles. To me, it's simply a factor of how things work out and how that particular issue is addressed. West. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right, and that Vietnam has handled this very well. Taiwan has handled this very, very well. South Korea has handled this pretty well, and that countries where there is more of a unified vision, where the population has more of a collectivist mindset, have been able to deal with this much more effectively. No question about it.
Caleb Maupin, as always, Caleb, thank you so much for your time. Always look forward to having you back. Have a wonderful weekend, man. Thanks for your contribution to the Critical Hour.
Sure, always a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Folks, you're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm your host, Dr. Wilmer Lee, and I'm joined by my co-host, Garland Nixon. There's more on the other side. Stay tuned.